Here on Solo Arts Heal, we come together to entertain and enlighten through terrific storytelling by survivors and caregivers of physical and mental challenges, offering performance and informants on health and wellness related issues to our communities, including the health crisis of climate change once a month, with an understanding that it's up to us all to help heal our Mother Earth. Solo Arts Heal began as a collective of solo artists whose creative work reflects the healing power of the arts. And to this, we remain dedicated, as each week presenting performance excerpts and talkbacks with audiences, while full performances of these shows are developed to work in theaters, universities, and other schools and environments, which we will eventually be able to do once again, hopefully before too many months pass us by. Solar Arts Heal is a theater of resilience that embraces the power of community and the healing power of the arts. And once again, here on the Marsh Stream, we couldn't enjoy a more outstanding example than with Melissa Bangs in Playing Monopoly with God, that addresses the astonishingly common condition of postnatal depression and postpartum psychosis. Let me tell you about our guest. After giving birth at 40, Melissa Bangs is admitted to the psych ward, dramatically sleep deprived. A month later, she is sent home on lithium. On her road to healing, Melissa read her entire hospital record. Somewhere around page 87, she found a note. Patient says she will do comedy on this experience. Upon reading this, she laughed out loud. The psych team could not have known that she studied comedy at the Upright Citizens Brigade in New York City, nor imagined that sharing her experience would prove healing for thousands of people. Melissa Bangs has a knack for cutting to the bone of the human condition. Her true gift, however, is her ability to strip away the agony and transform the room to an uproar of laughter. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Gail.
So lovely to have you here. I'd like now to ask Kristen to play the introduction to the play, and then if you wouldn't mind introducing the piece that we're going to see after that, that would be great. Thank you.
So here we are, Rattlestick Theater, New York City, sitting backstage in this.
Yeah,
That's
so
perfect, because you can tell us more about the actual performance we're about to see. Thank you.
absolutely. So we selected about 20 minutes of what is actually about an hour and 10-minute show. It is not a play, it's storytelling, and it's, I call it a one-woman tragicomedy, or a one-woman nonfiction tragicomedy. And, Gail and I selected about 20 minutes of it. The first third of the show is the birth of Adelaide. And this particular section, you will go with the psych ward. You'll go with me to the psych ward and experience a little bit of not only what it was like to be there, but the state that I was in, this alternate reality that I was in. And the rattlestick, so this was after, when Gail, you shared that at page 87, I laughed out loud when I read that they it looked like a nurse had scribbled really late at night. Patient says she'll do comedy on this experience. And I thought, oh my God, I wonder if they changed my meds at that point. They thought, this is not working. She thinks she's going to do comedy. But I, as a part of my healing within that first year, started writing. And I ended up writing this show under less than 2 years after a month in the psych ward, which was my first, knock on wood, psychotic break in my life, first and only thus far. And it was absolutely a part of my healing. And I will say that I toured Montana, my husband and I, and Adelaide was little, and our 130-pound dog traveled. We toured Montana for about a year with the show, and then we did a GoFundMe campaign, and we toured the West Coast for a year and sold out shows up and down the West Coast. And the Rattlestick show.
Montana. Your
Mhm.
home is in Montana as well.
Yeah, my home's in Montana. I'm in Montana tonight, covered in snow. It is a winter wonderland here. Um, and this Rattlestick show was after the West Coast tour, and Postpartum Support International, which is a leading organization that I've sat on the advisory board of for several years, invited me there to celebrate a major anniversary for them there at the Rattlestick. So we did a 4-night run there. And so what you'll see tonight is from there.
Terrific. Well, Kristen, whenever you're ready, then.
Now, some people who want to connect with the divine smoke peyote and walk into the desert with a medicine man. Others might take a vow of silence and meditate or pray on a mountaintop for a good long time. Me, I just gave birth at 40 when my hormones were completely whacked and didn't sleep for a month, and bam, I could see God in everything. I felt these profound waves of forgiveness and compassion. I felt like I was this open channel to ancient truths. One day I said to Eric, baby, did you know that in every given moment, there's only ever one choice? Fear or love. Fear or love, baby. Fear or love. I felt as if the world had begun to vibrate at a higher and higher frequency, and those of us that chose love, well, we were going to become light. Light was compassion, it was forgiveness, it was peace. I was pretty excited about it. I need to make sure that Adelaide and Eric and our 3 kitties were coming with me. So I decided to demonstrate to Eric that the physical world was dissolving. Among other wild acts, I did a little piece of naked performance art. You might think this happened often in our marriage, me standing up here talking about my huge vagina and such, but this was in fact the only piece of naked performance art in our marriage thus far. While naked, and I will say this made complete sense at the time, it was brilliant, in fact. I drank the cat water, which tasted surprisingly like human water. I peed in the baby swing, and then I smashed a glass on the floor and I stepped all over it with my bare feet. Somehow my message of baby, it's all love, was kind of lost in translation. Next thing you know, I wake up in lockdown at this loony bin with mastitis and a couple of rock-hard triple Ds. No one really mentions in birth class, you might go to the loony bin. There was talk of the baby blues. They touched a little bit on postpartum depression, not much, but a little bit. But no one had mentioned that my brain might just go on sabbatical despite her tenured post. Turns out a reported 15 to 20% of moms experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. This ranges from depression, anxiety, PTSD, panic, bipolar, OCD, psychosis, and 5% go to the psych ward. And leaders in the field will tell you that we know that those numbers that experience the perinatal mood or anxiety disorders are likely much higher, given that stigma looms so large that many, many moms never reach out and get help and are simply enduring inside. So there I am in a baby blue room with 3 cameras on the ceiling, and I'm just aching to hold Adelaide, to feed her, to smell her. I felt as if my arms had been ripped from my body and I just might bleed out. Some days I felt as if I was literally searching for the ground with my tears, just sending out these massive search parties, this sobbing, and trouble was, this state was bottomless. Nothing known or familiar, not for weeks. And it was in the state of the unknown, in total free fall, that these loving voices arrived. They'd say things to me like, "There is no right or wrong, love. It is all intention. The past is done. You are forgiven. There is only now. And you are love." They'd say, "Breathe, Mela. Breathe." And when I could listen to them, and when I remembered to breathe, I was gifted these moments in lockdown at the loony bin that were kind of extraordinary. I'll share a few. I remember that somehow everyone's primary physical flaw was a sign they too were God. So everyone who came into my room, I'd be like, "Where's her flaw? Where's his flaw? Where's her flaw?" There was a nurse with a wandering eye. There was one with scars on her neck. And another one whose eyes were permanently wide open, like she was always surprised. And I thought, yep, divine, divine, divine. I had to laugh out loud when I realized that the two people who had to truly hear me in order for me ever to go home, my psychiatrist and my social worker, both fucking wore hearing aids. I was like, "You funny." One day, I was sitting in my room by myself and looking out the north-facing picture window, and I was laughing at something that I can't remember now, and this gust of wind came up, and it picked these vibrant yellow leaves from the tree, and it catapulted them in this shape and rhythm that seemed to mimic my laugh. Well, this made me laugh. And it happened again, perfect repetition. So, the wind, the leaves, and I, we just hung out for a while together, just chuckling. One day, I played Monopoly with God. There was this male nurse and these 4 psych patients and me, and he was so funny and smart and kind, and he kept changing the rules so like every one of us would make more money on every turn. And you wouldn't lose your property, you would always advance, you wouldn't go to jail. And I thought, oh, he's definitely the manifestation of God in the room tonight. No doubt about that. Well, God and I tied, but not before he agreed to clean up the shanty towns on Baltic and Mediterranean. And I thought, holy shit, how cool is this? Here I am in lockdown, I've lost my mind, and God and I are eradicating poverty. At some point, I realized that they kept evading my questions about when I might go home. And I thought, oh, they're planning a surprise going away party for me, and they can't tell me. Well, I didn't want to ruin the surprise, but I did want to make sure that every one of my companions on the highly medicated lockdown side of the ward was invited. This is the side devoid of niceties like classes, a lounge, snack fridge, and in most cases, surprise parties. I broke the rule several times about not going into other patients' rooms in order to invite every one of Nancy's personalities. I even got to invite the dark, spewing, food-throwing Nancy because, who knew? People heal. Maybe that's what dark, spewing, food-throwing Nancy needed. A little surprise. A little party. Nancy's was not the only room I entered illegally. Earl and I got off to a rough start. Every time I'd pass his room on the way to the bathroom, he'd say, "Tell her to shut up. Tell her to shut up." I'd see these images in my mind's eye of Earl's past hurts, his regrets, and I felt compelled to tell him telepathically from my hospital bed, "Earl, you are forgiven. There's only now, man. Your love. Tell her to shut up." Well, one day, I pass Earl's room on the way to the bathroom, and he doesn't yell at me. He smiles. So I walked straight into his room, and I held his hand, and we said nothing. We just smiled at each other for a while, until I was escorted out of his room. Earl and I would meet again. We meet up again on the open side when we were both moved there, and we would share a meal and spend some time. And I learned that he had been in a wheelchair for about 8 years. He was a veteran. He carried a lot of shame. So one day I said to him with my mouth, Earl, maybe your paralysis is all that regret. Like, maybe if you could forgive yourself, you'd walk again. What do you know? One day I come around the corner, here's Earl's wife standing with her mouth dropped open crying, and here's Earl, and he's walking towards us. Now, he's not walking very well, mind you, but he's walking, and he sees me, and he says, and I said, I remember one day Eric was visiting, and I had this fear that if he left, they were never going to let him back in. So I thought, what can I do? What can I do? I can't let him leave. I know. I'll play dead. So I'm laying there playing dead, and I think, oh my God, please don't stick me with a needle. I don't think I can play dead if you stick me with a needle. Well, they didn't stick me with a needle, but they did take my pulse. Turns out the plan was flawed. But I have some chops, so I'm still holding on to the act. I'm not giving in that easy. I said, how do you know that's not my last beat? Right there. Last one. And as I'm holding on, really with everything I'm worth, I think, wait a minute, maybe this is a brilliant mistake. I mean, if I'm dead, at some point they'll bury me alive. But if I'm in a coma, maybe they'll let Eric hang out, like bring me flowers, sit by my bed, hold my hand, tell me all those things our loved ones really only figure out how to say when we're in a coma. I never get enough coma talk from that man. Before he left that day, he said, babe, I'm pretty sure that they're going to let me back in here. But if there ever comes a day that they don't, you don't worry. I'll bust you out of here. I believed him. Again and again, as I would ask when I might go home, the answer continued to be, it's too soon to tell. I'd signed this document in a completely whacked out state, agreeing to put myself in the care of Dr. Held, the psychiatrist. If I wanted to go home before he deemed it safe, well, I could sign another document contesting his holding me, but ultimately it was up to Dr. Held. Did I go home or did I go to long-term psychiatric care? Did I stay on the lockdown side of the ward or was I allowed to attend classes on the open side? It was up to Dr. Held whether or not my suicide score was low enough to be allowed to pass my time alone in my room with any number of items. Now, I don't have any memory of wanting to die in this experience. Sure, I stepped all over broken glass and pulled my catheter out and I played dead, but I didn't want to die. I wanted to go home with Adelaide. I did, however, in this state, spend time thinking about the pain and desperation and creativity of people who had wanted to end it all in the psych ward, as the list of things I asked for that I was not allowed to have was pretty unreal. I'll just give you a few examples. Pens, pencils, floss, nail polish, nail clippers, shoelaces, colored pencils, paintbrushes. I thought, wow, that'd be some way to go. Just paint myself into oblivion. Dr. Held not only decided were I a threat to myself, but were I a threat to Adelaide. She'd visit at least every other day and stay for a half hour, an hour, and he would decide in those visits whether or not I was allowed to hold her. Every time I saw her, every particle of my being cried out to hold her. Being away from her was the most excruciating, unnatural thing I have ever experienced. I would have given anything to go home with her, and I do mean anything. According to my hospital record, I attempted to rebirth Adelaide 3 times. I scared the pants off the poor souls in lockdown with me. I still remember the face of this one male nurse just pleading with me not to do it again. Apparently, he'd never been to a live childbirth before. I still remember one of the 3 times. I had this idea that if I could return with every ounce of my being to the moment of her birth, maybe I'd just wake up at home with her in my arms, like press restart, right? You know, like travel through time and space on the wings of love. You see, in this state, I knew things about quantum physics, theories of relativity, and far beyond. There's no such thing as time and space, love. These are man-made constructs. Everyone you have ever loved is here now. Even if these baby blue walls encase the rest of your existence, Adelaide is here. Eric is here. In those moments, I could smell her. I felt as if someone had given me my arms back and she was in them. And I could see Eric's eyes, that loving gaze that never once in this experience made me feel as if I was crazy or as if somehow this was all my fault. And her smell and his gaze would hold me for a minute, 10, an hour, and then I'd come to and I'd think, we got to get the fuck out of here. Do normal, Mella. Just do normal. How does one do normal when sitting in a psych ward? I had a lot of time to contemplate this. Let me paint the scene for you. You're sitting in a room by yourself. You're alone in this room for most of the 24 hours of the day, save a routine visit here and there. You're wearing purple scrubs. All the crazies are. You got on soft slippers, no shoes, so you can't hurt anyone. You're wearing your own bathrobe, which is a comfort and a luxury and a reminder of home, but it's flung open kind of sloppily. You can't have a rope. Your silverware are plastic, and your colored pencils are contraband. How do you pass your time? Now, keep in mind there are cameras on the ceiling, and the nurses in the hall are taking notes. I thought, well, if I clean or organize too much, OCD. If I laugh too easily too often, delusional. If I sleep all the time, what do you think? Depressed. If I make too much art, manic. I remember I had to hide my Cosmic Poo series. Such a shame, because really I'd like to share them with the world. I had rendered these beautiful drawings of my bowel movements. Their color, consistency, texture. I was deciphering divine messages from God through my feces. I was like, holy shit. You're kidding me. Oh, no. I mean, no, I got it. I'll write it down. I mean, you gifted me with artistic talent and a photographic memory. You got it. I'll go write it down. Okay. Cosmic poo was not the only thing I had to hide in order to get home. I remember one day Dr. Held asked me, he said, do you have a Jesus complex? I thought, wow, had he been watching me in my morning stretches? I just kept getting stuck in this position. Just felt so good. It felt so good. He asked me that question, do you have a Jesus complex? And 2 quick thoughts passed my brain. I thought, don't you? And then I thought, aren't we all God? And I quickly said, no, no. Dr. Held would meet with my family from time to time and update them on recent changes in behavior and meds. And it seemed somewhere around 2.5 weeks while I'd been doing well enough to attend classes with patients on the open side, I was exhibiting some inappropriate behavior. Not really of the naked performance art vein. More, I kept interrupting the class as if I were the facilitator. My dad says, "Great news." Dr. Held says, "What?" And my dad said, "Yeah, I mean, the only thing that might more clearly indicate that Mel's back is if she starts telling you how to do your job." What can I say? I'm opinionated. I lack filters. I'm working on it. You own it. You work on it. You got to love yourself in the meantime. I already had told him how to do his job. For many days in a row, as I struggled with the disjointed perceptions of the state and the many psychotropic drugs, I looked to those 10 to 15 minutes a day as an opportunity to find out what the fuck was happening to me. Was I ever going to get better? Was there any pathway home? I was terrified. I needed guidance, reassurance. I read my chart about a year later, and it said again and again, needy, and asks a lot of questions. And as I read it, I thought, how does one not do needy in this scenario? I'm making with every fiber of my being to hold my baby, to feed her, to smell her. Yes, I have 100 questions. This is my first time doing crazy. My only frame of reference is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I don't know if it's this peculiar state or any one of the 4 drugs I'm on today, but I'm having a hard time remembering anything or lining up ideas in a row. You see, Dr. Held had to know me and my state ever to deem me well enough to go home, but he had so many patients in a day, so many records to maintain, so much on his plate and in his mind that he'd blow in and blow out, and I felt as if I knew nothing more, and I worried that neither did he. So one day, when he came to visit, I said, Dr. Held, when you come to my room, even if it's just for 10 minutes, could you come in and sit down and take a breath and be here now with me and with my questions and my state? And he did. And he did every day for the rest of the time I was there. And I will always be so grateful.
What happened?
Not about being bipolar.
Thank you. Am I on? Thank you so much for that. I know that that closing line was you were always so grateful for that doctor did that. And that is really beautiful how important that is, that the doctor listened and he cared and he did what you needed. He did that every day for the rest of the time you were there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that, sharing that performance. What a remarkable story you have, and you reveal so many hilarious and heart-wrenching moments during that lockdown. We and also I want to say that it's the perfect sneak preview that doesn't give away any of the big reveals, which are saved for the full piece that is going to be available for the Marshstream Spotlight performance this weekend. And we have a lot to talk about here. And I just want to, before we launch in, let me just take a moment to remind the audience that posted in the chat is the link to the tip jar. Your tax-deductible support is so appreciated and needed to keep the Marshstream platform available to our communities during this time of isolation and theater closure. 70% of Marsh funding comes through ticket sales, and we're counting on your support. Also, we encourage comments and questions from the audience. This is particularly this subject. There's a lot of, we expect that you might have questions. We're going to be posting resources in the chat. So the chat is open now. We encourage your questions and comments, and you can post whether you're on the Zoom platform or the Marsh YouTube channel, and our producers, Kristen and Brianna, will help us keep an eye on that. All comments and questions will get to the performer, and we'll get to as many as we can on the live platform. So don't hold back. The chat is open now. So, Melissa.
Yes.
So I read a review about your show in Mama Load, the terrific platform for moms and all parents. Elke Groverstein, I think, Groverstein. And I just want to read that. It said, when it was over, when your show was over, she felt changed. Unquote here, opened up, exhilarated and exhausted. What I felt was nothing short of awe. Melissa Bangs is a force, and this show is a window into one of the great stories. I've been quoted as saying, I believe that an authentic story can change the world, or at least change someone's life. But after witnessing the unsinkable Melissa Bangs on stage, I need to add that an authentic story can also start a conversation that allows for our darkness and to shine, allows for our darkness to shine. An authentic story can heal. That's beautiful. And I so agree. When we first met a couple of years ago, and I produced you in New York for the APAP convention, and just have been very impressed and admire your story so much, your storytelling. So this was the first show, one woman show in the US that is an autobiographical account of this postpartum psychosis. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And that's a key detail, right? It was psychosis, not depression.
Psychosis. Yeah. And psychosis is really rare. You heard it here in this piece. It's 1 in 1,000 moms will experience postpartum psychosis. But when I decided to tell this story, it was really for any mom, dad, and family, partner, right? Loved ones walking with a mama and her partner that experienced something entirely unexpected, that was traumatic or full of pain and oftentimes shame and loneliness, and that she or her team, her partner, felt absolutely unprepared for.
So what was your driving force behind writing the show, taking it to the stage?
Yeah. It's so interesting because I'll say a couple of things. One thing I'll say is that, I spent a month in the psych ward. And you can imagine, Gail, you're a mama, and any of the moms or dads in the audience, or even if you're a pet owner, like, and your animals are your beloved family members, like one day disappearing on these beings that count on you. I mean, I had fed Adelaide from my breast from the moment she was born, right? And then I'm just gone. And there was so much agony and shame and grief and trauma in the psych ward experience itself. But when I got home, just like, this was of course pre-COVID, so people could visit me, thank God. You think about the things that mamas, in any health crisis right now in COVID, where you cannot be visited by your loved ones, my heart just goes out, my prayers go out so big time to anyone on a health journey amidst COVID, because I actually could have, when I arrived home, mom after mom, friend after friend, family member showed up with food and, sweet things, and wanted to, listen to me and hug me and see me and hear me and support me in any way they could, like walk Adelaide or take Adelaide so that I could take it, I could take a nap or come clean the kitchen or do the laundry or something. And the most amazing thing was that mom after mom, and this was my generation, generations younger than me, my mom's generation, even older, everyone had a story. And like the 30th mom sat on my couch and said, Mela, I've never told anyone this, but when my second baby was 9 months old, I had seen myself hanging from the kitchen rafters every day for 9 months. And I've never told anyone until I'm telling you now. And
Wow.
I thought, holy shit. I mean, this is a friend who I knew every detail of her, her marriage and like marriage counseling, her sex life, things I didn't even want to know. And yet I didn't know that she had had these deeply disturbing thoughts for months. And, her husband's a social worker and her best friend, and she never told him. And it just hit me that none of us were telling these stories, that the shame and was so thick
Mm-hmm.
that we were doing it all alone. We were blaming ourselves and we were not seeking help. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to tell a story. And so that was the beginning. It was a longer journey than that, but there was definitely a decision made that day on the couch.
Wow, because one becomes so much more confused, probably keeping it to yourself, not being able to understand why am I having these feelings? I love my child, and then it's a separate reality.
Mhm. And it's interesting because psychosis is a break from reality, right? And depression, which is much more common, postpartum depression, some research says 15 to 20% of moms will experience postpartum depression. Other research where, like, for example, there's a hospital in Detroit that has done incredible postpartum care for 40 years. And because they create a culture of care and support and a culture of sharing these stories where moms feel really comfortable sharing the reality of what they're experiencing, they test much more. Like 40% of moms experiencing postpartum depression, where moms feel safe answering those surveys honestly. And then we also know that women of color and indigenous mamas and immigrant mamas and mamas with lots of barriers or historical trauma or poverty and all the things, um, will experience rates even 30, 40, up to 50% higher. And I guess I'm not exactly sure where I was going, other than saying, it's so much bigger than what I particularly experienced. For me, I know I was going. For me, it was a break from reality, and for many moms, like in depression, um, you know, I think oftentimes anxiety is very common postpartum. OCD is very common postpartum, and OCD postpartum are often deeply disturbing, often dark, even violent thoughts that reoccur. And they often involve the baby, and they can even involve mom doing something to the baby. But as long as those thoughts are something that are deeply disturbing to mama, research shows she is almost entirely, like, research says she won't do those things, that it is a subconscious playing out her fears, and not so much her fears of what she'll do, but her fears around the baby's vulnerability. And it is that break from reality that becomes dangerous. So I won't reveal a lot from the full show either, but I will say that in the full show, you see where I had some deeply disturbing ideas that didn't disturb me, that in my reality I was in, they were quite beautiful. And in, you know, but they were horrifying to my husband.
Mhm. Your husband is was wonderful and an incredible support, and I remember him introducing my beautiful wife, and he introduces you sometimes for
Mm,
your shows.
yeah,
Um, we do have a comment from Mark
mhm,
Solomons
yeah,
saying, Melissa, as an individual with a mental illness who has been hospitalized, it is a shock for the entire family. Your
yeah.
description of being apart from your daughter is heart wrenching. My query, were there any symptoms you noticed prior to the naked moment? I'm thinking of the condition and experience was more well known. We and families and professionals can intervene prior to full blown
Yeah.
psychosis.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your comments and your question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because this was my first time having a psychotic break, neither my husband or I could see or read the writing on the wall. Now that we know what we know, I think even 4 days earlier, we would have sought drastic intervention, because I had absolutely stopped sleeping. I
Mm.
could not sleep. So I'm giving birth at 40. My mom hit perimenopause at 42. And while I was wildly in love with Adelaide and really blissed out, and some mamas in depression postpartum don't feel anything, right? And they don't feel a bond with the baby and they don't feel love. And then they feel all the cycles of shame that they don't feel love. And that's a whole nother heart-wrenching journey. But in this case, I was mad in love, but I was getting less and less and less and less and less sleep until I could not sleep at all. And so there are 4 days that I was not sleeping for 24-hour periods. That would have sounded alarm bells if we had known better.
Right.
And when we were trying to protect my sleep, we were trying to get me sleep, but I really needed to be knocked out. I at that point, I needed medical support to sleep. There was no just make it quiet enough and give me time to sleep. I'll also say I was speaking really rapidly. I am a list maker. I'm an Aries. I'm a doer. I make lists. I love checking things off. I love getting things done. I'm very creative. I'm a dreamer. That was all there, but it was there like tenfold, where
Mm.
I would write things all over Post-its and Eric would come home and they were everywhere,
You're
right?
kind of
Uh,
manic in a sense.
yeah. And I had the perception that I could see other people's past lives. And I was calling people up and telling them about their past lives the day
Wow.
before I was hospitalized.
Let's talk about this for a minute because I do want to have time to get into the incredible good work that you've been doing over these years. Just to say, first of all, that we're posting in the chat some resources that Melissa has provided for us on Prenatal Mental Health Alliance for People of Color, for instance, Maternal Mental Health Now in Los Angeles, and so on. And also, postpartum psychosis is a rare illness compared to the rates of postpartum depression. It occurs, you said, about 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 deliveries, or about 1 to 2% of births, right?
Yes.
And the onset is usually sudden, often within the first 2 weeks postpartum. And so the symptoms include hallucinations, feeling very irritated, hyperactivity. What are some other rapid mood swings, inability to sleep?
Mm-hmm. I
Uh-huh.
would say there is, and sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not, a complete break from reality at some point. I would also say that every psychosis survivor I've ever met, postpartum or otherwise, at some point that experience is deeply spiritual, even if they're atheists. No matter their spiritual perspective, they end up having a
These
deeply
kind of
spiritual.
delusions or strange beliefs and hallucinations kind of that
Yes.
going on.
Yes.
So and also the most significant risk factors are a personal or family history of bipolar disorder or a previous psychotic episode, although again, as you said in your case, that isn't necessarily
No, I will say that one of the risk factors that I did have was I was a survivor of sexual abuse as a young child. And so that is a piece that appeared before I was admitted in the psych ward. And it is actually a piece that wildly, and maybe I think this might be a chapter in the book that I'm writing, but it is a piece that actually experienced an incredible amount of healing around while psychotic. Um, where I never remembered quite who had done it. I
Mm,
would get all these images and I remembered moments, but I was young. I was, I think, under 4 from the memories, but I never really knew who, how often.
mhm.
Um, but I had all the signs of blackouts and, just the violent responses to sexual vulnerability as a young woman. And I actually, while psychotic, had access to everything that had ever happened. And
Wow.
those loving voices that I tell you about that surrounded me held me through seeing it all and would tell me over and over, this was not your fault. You were only a child. You are love. The past is done. There
Wow.
is only now. You are love. And wildly, um, there's a whole bunch that healed in that realm by losing my mind, which you're not gonna, I don't think you could learn about that in like studying psychology.
Right, right. Yeah, it
Or
was
don't purposefully go lose sleep to have that happen. That was kind of a rare experience.
So we do encourage anyone that knows anybody, if you ever notice this type of thing, because we've all heard about postnatal depression, but this psychosis episode is really important to know about, because I think there's a suicide rate and even an infanticide. How do you say that?
Yes,
Infanticide,
infanticide.
infanticide rate with the
Yeah,
illness,
and
but
whether it's like, and I would say whether it's psychosis or depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, postpartum PTSD, one of the most common barriers to seeking care and to healing is stigma and the shame, and that women can suffer for years with these experiences untreated. If they go untreated, they don't just, miraculously go away when the baby's a certain age. Sometimes the experience itself goes away, but what often doesn't lift is the shame, um, and the isolation around the experience that you had. And I have, one of the things I've done for the last 5 or 6 years is lead storytelling workshops for survivors of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or moms that had loss or trauma, pregnant, during birth, postpartum, and help them find their voice and their story in a radically non-judgmental space.
Mhm, mhm.
And it's incredible what can lift by simply sounding your voice and your truth in a place where people are not judging you.
That's beautiful. So it is, it's temporary and treatable with professional help, but it's an emergency, and it's essential that people receive immediate help.
That's true with psychosis. I would say psychosis is an emergency.
Yeah,
They are not all emergencies. Postpartum depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD are not all emergencies, but psychosis for sure. I will say for the others, there is help, and you don't have to endure alone.
right. That's great. Art Solomons again says absolutely important to recognize the spiritual element, whether messianic, complex, or other. We have spiritual emergence to consider, and the DSM-4 Code of Spiritual Experience, which I don't know what that is.
Mhm.
Let us consider lack of sleep to be a major symptom to be aware of. But that's very important. Thank you again, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Mark. I think that, sleep deprivation is one of the number one pieces that I um, talk about when I talk about my particular experience. And I will say that after I lost my mom and I was putting on a huge show, the show Momedy, with 7 other moms and a dad and their stories, and produced that show and put it up for a year. The Mother's Day after she died, and I had been putting up this huge show, I got sleep deprived enough for the first time since the psychotic break that I remember an afternoon in the grocery store where all of humanity looked slightly more beautiful than it usually does. And the produce was, talking to me in a way. I mean, I'm intuitive and psychic and spiritual and an artist anyway. But then, like I opened my car door, there's a rainbow, I start crying. I talk to the produce guy for like 20 some minutes and think he's the most beautiful human being I've ever met. And then I called my husband and I said, it feels like the beginning of the last time.
Wow. Yeah.
And he said, babe, call Dr. White. So I called the doctor who you hear about in the full show,
Mhm.
and my journey to recovery. And she had me in the office within 2 hours, and I went home with a
Right.
bag of remedies to balance my hormones and my neurotransmitters and to get me sleeping. And I slept 8 hours that night and 11 the next night, and I didn't go to psychosis, but I think I could have.
Wow, that's really, really important to know. Let's talk about, since the time's passing so much, and I do want to hear about your new project. But first, I know you emceed a maternal mental health conference this past week, and it's in your third year. You co-founded. You have over 260 providers, docs, nurses, home visitors, social workers. Tell us about this and the conference and the work that you've been doing.
It's really been a dream, Gail. I with telling my story, I always hoped that it would both impact individuals and families and, community conversations around this topic, but I also hoped that it would impact hospital systems and the the actual professional trajectory and the toolboxes of providers and professionals, and hundreds of them that walk with moms and families in this vulnerable period. And yes, this is the third year I partnered with Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies of Montana. It's here in the chat. And the last two conferences were in person. This one was virtual. This allowed us actually to amplify and expand the conference in a beautiful way. And we brought in incredible trainers from Maternal Mental Health Now in Los Angeles. And we brought in an amazing doc out of Utah who does work around substance use disorders with moms and pregnant moms. And Anna King at a Maternal Mental Health Now in LA did a piece around bias and racism historically and today around Black and brown bodies and birthing mamas. And there was an Indigenous panel. I've, for the last couple of years, partnered with April Charlo, who is Salish, and she lives on the Flathead Reservation here in Montana. And she was one of the Momedians that came out and told her story in Momedy. And she was spectacular. Her story is so funny and so sad and devastating. And she's a force, and she really broke the silence in tribal communities in Montana. And she and I traveled with a grant with Blue Cross Blue Shield to tribal communities, sharing our stories and holding workshops for Indigenous moms. And there's a panel of her and other Indigenous mama survivors. And you can actually access the 5 days of this conference, including a full day on dads, which was so cool, a full day on substance use disorders, 2 days of maternal mental health 101. It's incredible. And it was already in the time of COVID. It's like this series you're doing, Gail, is a treasure, and yet it's free, which is one of the gifts of COVID. And it's like these 5 days of this conference were being given away at $125. I mean, it was so amazing. But for tonight, for anyone here, providers, survivors, advocates, it's like $87 for the 5 days of content. And
that's available through November 30th. And
November 30th. You can watch it all through November 30th and go to that link.
Thank you so much. That's terrific. Tell us what's next for you. Tell us about the book and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so I have been, I did lose my mom, and that was another unbelievable journey. And wildly, I would say that psychosis and surviving that and having the profound healing journey that I have had prepared me in some ways for another journey of tremendous loss, and how to remain present and how to remain in gratitude and continue breathing and put one foot in front of the other and show up for those beautiful, beautiful moments. I had 10 months with my mama from the day she was diagnosed to the day she passed. And thank God enough healing had happened. I mean, she was one of my best friends, and she was one of my toughest relationships. And I think she would say the same thing, that I was one of her favorite people on the planet. And, I was her baby till the day she died. I mean, I was her baby even when I was carrying her to the bathroom easily, because she was just right. And so I've been writing a show called Mama, and at the same time kind of parallel a book of short stories called Bang Bang. My last name is Bangs, and these are just stories from my life, and kind of making sense of the loss of her while making sense of my journey with myself in this lifetime, and with these two parallel projects. I'll also say that one piece within Mama that's just, for a long time, I've been writing and thinking, am I writing just as a part of my grief process, and this is just for me? Or is this some part of this that I feel like won't be complete unless I share it with others? And I keep kind of getting that scratch in the back of my head, like, you're going to have to share this. You're going to have to share this. And so I've been imagining starting, a series of like mini events this winter, where I would share an excerpt from the show or an excerpt from the book, and then just have a conversation, very much like we're doing today, but really then have a conversation with everyone here. So if it's Mama, have a conversation about grief, right? Or if it's one of the stories from the book, one of the first stories I wrote in the book was about postpartum sex. And no, it's not 20 minutes of silence. It's not 7 pages with no words on it. You would think that's what it would be, is 8 blank pages. But I thought we could then have a chat about not only postpartum sex, but maybe even COVID sex. That would be interesting. But I think one of the profound gifts for me, when I think about journeying with my mom, there were so many, but one was she and I were so close and fiercely in love. We also both were survivors of sexual abuse as really young children, and both experienced trauma and then had these defense mechanisms around trauma that we often played out with each other. And I loved her fiercely, but I'd never fully forgave her until those last 10 months and that really sacred walk together. And one of the surprises, I mean, it was so beautiful to let it all go before she left and have these moments of being with like my pure being and her pure being, and not have there be nothing in the room but love. But it's also led to me being so much gentler with myself as a mama. This is perfect. This is my 8-year-old. This is Adelaide.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you. That's great. Well, I just am so happy to have Adelaide here and you here. It's been just a pleasure. And I want to say a very special thank you, Melissa Banks, for
Oh,
tonight's featured presentation of Playing Monopoly with God.
thank
And
you.
remind the audience that this show is going to be spotlighted with a full performance this weekend on the Marsh stream. So be sure to tune in and see the full show with Stephanie Weissman and Melissa's talk back with the Marsh artistic director Stephanie, and look for this show and more on the website, and post it in the chat and on our Marsh stream YouTube platform. You two are beautiful. It's
Oh, you are, Gail. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who came out tonight to be with us and make space for this story in your hearts and minds. I'm so grateful.
Oh, I'm so grateful to you. And I'm pleased. I do want to announce next week we have an incredible show for you related to science and climate. Science Fair is an opera singer's love song to science, conceived and performed by mezzo-soprano Hai-Ting Chin and pianist Erica Switzer. Science Fair is a musical celebration of science with a libretto created from the words of scientists and teachers, and original music to illuminate our current understanding of the natural world, celebrating curiosities like the formation of our solar system, the structure of the atom, the ancient legacy of DNA. Science Fair pairs lighthearted humor with luscious operatic vocals to uplift the ordinary and into the realm of wonder, and is performed with live science experiments. So we're going to see excerpts from that, and Hai-Ting Chin will be on hand with the excerpts and a live talk back. So again, thank you, Melissa Banks, and to our Zoom and YouTube audiences, Marsh Stream producers Kristen, Brianna, and artistic director Stephanie Weissman. We're all in this together. Join us nightly on the Marsh Stream. I look forward to seeing you this weekend for Melissa Banks' full spotlight performance of Playing Monopoly with God, and next week for Science Fair. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.